Welcome to the Best of Beaver County, presented by St. Barnabas, a weekly segment dedicated to putting the focus on the amazing things and the amazing people behind them in Beaver County. The Best of Beaver County is sponsored by and content is provided by St. Barnabas. The show airs every Thursday from 11 to 11:30 on WBBP, WMBA, 99.3 FM, and Facebook Live. Now, with no further ado, let's welcome host Mike Romigh to introduce today's program.
Good morning and welcome to the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. I'm Mike Romigh. I want to remind you that since 1900 and counting, the St. Barnabas Health System has become a trusted name in healthcare, focusing on compassionate and quality care. Today in Allegheny, Beaver, and Butler counties, we offer a full continuum of care for our patients, residents, and retirement community family. The St. Barnabas Health System has developed into a visionary leader in the healthcare industry, offering an array of unparalleled healthcare services from skilled nursing to extensive memory care activities and programs. Additionally, the medical center has world-class doctor and dentistry teams where patients can receive a full range of services under one roof that also include comprehensive rehabilitation, home health and home care, hospice care, and palliative care. Building upon its heritage, St. Barnabas continues to reach out to those in need and lives out its mission through individual and institutional services which help the health, education, and social needs of others. Men and women are invited to join in the work of continuing Christian caring, healing, and teaching, and along with St. Barnabas, bear witness to its founder's reminder, God is able. So with many fun events that start in April, like Pirate Baseball, so good so far, and opening day for fishing recently, April is Stress Awareness Month. It's important to understand both the short-term and long-term effects of stress. Joining us today is Jeff Bost. Jeff is a neurosurgical physician assistant, and we talk with Jeff about managing stress, along with discussing the clinical studies focused on reducing brain plaque and possible cures for the debilitating disease of Alzheimer's. Good morning, Jeff, and welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Mike. It's always great to be here.
Well, I know oftentimes when we get together to discuss matters, we talk about Alzheimer's disease, and I look forward to the day when I can bring you on the program and you can tell us that we have come up with a cure for Alzheimer's. But
Mike, I'd love to be there for that.
Yeah, but that's still off in the distance.
Well, it is, and you know, we're getting closer every day, and one of the things that we do know is that, you know, there are medicines that are now floating around that have had some benefits, but really this is a lifestyle problem, Alzheimer's disease. The number one risk factor, I'd like to stress this to our listeners the most, is the number one risk factor of Alzheimer's disease is aging. So we all want to grow older, but we also want to remain healthy and avoid conditions like Alzheimer's disease. So that primarily goes back to our lifestyle and the things that we can do in our lives to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. That's not to say that some Alzheimer's disease is not inherited, but the vast, vast majority, 90+%, is related to our lifestyle.
And when you say lifestyle, a lifestyle disease, do you mean diet, environmental factors? Go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the things that we do in our life play a huge role on how long we live and the health that we maintain throughout our life. And Alzheimer's disease is just like any other chronic disease, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, osteoporosis, and other things. It's how we take care of ourselves throughout our lifespan and what we do to try to remain healthy. So one of the biggest risk factors we know of Alzheimer's disease is smoking. Those people that smoke have a greater risk of Alzheimer's disease. Those people that have cardiovascular disease and diabetes and a poor diet that is inflammatory, such as our typical American or Western diet, full of fatty foods and sugar and excessive salt, we're all have a greater risk for things like the degenerative condition of Alzheimer's disease. So if we can control or curb those actions, there's a very highly positive chance that we'll be able to avoid a lot of those chronic problems.
So then it doesn't then necessarily have to be hereditary. One family member can have it, but that doesn't mean it's a marker for the rest of the family.
Well, it's a complicated question, and because there are some genetic markers that have been linked to Alzheimer's disease. The most popular one, as far as one that's looked at the most, is called ApoE4. And it's a genetic allele, meaning it sits on a gene, and it is inherited. You can have one of the genes transferred from your father and your mother, or just one from your father and one from your mother. And those people that have those alleles or those genetic markers, whether it's from one parent, which is a certain risk, and then a greater risk from two parents, have a somewhat greater risk. But again, overall, that risk is probably less than 10% increase as far as your risk of having Alzheimer's disease. So there's an inherited part to it, but like I said earlier, the vast majority is not inherited. It's related to, as we get older, there's certain degenerative things that occur, especially clearing toxins and other waste products from our brain cells that slow down and therefore give us a greater risk factor of having plaque in our brain, which is the common focus related to Alzheimer's disease. So the things that we do today and early in life and throughout our life will have a big payoff at the end of our life.
Looking into certain things, certain factors that contribute to Alzheimer's or have the propensity of contributing to Alzheimer's. When you talk about when we're young, a lot of younger people playing athletics get concussions. If you're talking about PTSD, it's a term that we've grown to know since the 1960s and the war in Vietnam, but it's not just for military personnel. Sensory loss is another thing. Can you speak on those?
Yes, a concussion has not necessarily been related to Alzheimer's disease, but certainly head injury, and that's a substantial injury to the brain. For example, if someone was to fall when they're older and hit their head and have a subdural hematoma or a bruise on their brain, those can have a very rapid deterioration of brain function and lead to Alzheimer's quite rapidly. So injury to the brain should be reduced as much as possible at any age, but especially as you get older, because falls and other trauma to the head are really the number one cause of death in people as we get older as far as traumatic injury. So it also can increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease. As far as PTSD, the main factor associated with that, as well as things like anxiety and stress, is the fact that they increase your cortisol level and other hormones associated with stress. And we know that stress hormones are related to damage to the part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is the area of memory. And so they can accelerate memory loss problems to have excessive stress, which are associated with those conditions. And you mentioned sensory loss, which is a good thing to talk about in the sense that people with sensory loss, uncorrected vision or uncorrected hearing, certainly are at greater risk because their brain is not being stimulated. If you can't hear things and can't see things, your brain is not being stimulated. And just like any organ in our body, especially we compare it to a muscle, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if the brain is not stimulated by hearing things or seeing things or other sensory loss, it can have a great acceleration of impairment or degeneration. And the same thing with socialization. If we don't socialize and we don't talk to each other, and I'm not talking about, two people sitting down and watching a TV show. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about interaction of conversation and caring about the other person's feelings and thoughts can have a profound benefit. And we found that during COVID that people were not getting together, and that social isolation had a profound effect on accelerating Alzheimer's disease in the older people.
Is it possible to take control of these situations that come up in our life, and are there examples of it?
Well, life's about choices, and in fact, this information is available. That's one of the things that we do at St. Barnabas. Dr. Joseph Moon and myself have been working with St. Barnabas for a number of years with brain health and trying to reduce or minimize the risk factors of brain deterioration, as well as give people options, healthy options that they can do One of the big things, of course, at St. Barnabas is the socialization that occurs. You're not sitting alone in an empty home listening to the four walls talk back to you. You're in a social situation. You're up moving. You're getting a healthy diet full of antioxidants and omega-3s. So there are certain things that people can do to try to mitigate those problems that can occur as we get older. So I think, the idea of doing something rather than nothing, even small factors, can make a big difference.
And in terms of how this stress is managed in each individual, is it better to manage the stress while the event is occurring or afterwards when there's been a little bit of time to reflect on what caused the stress?
Well, we're all going to have some stress. Stress is a human nature condition, but it's how we react to stress, and it's sort of how we digest it, sort of like you suggested. Do we mull over that stress? Do we keep it in us for long periods of time? Does it affect our life and lifestyle? We all are going to be exposed to stress, whether we drive around the corner and someone cuts us off, or, we get an unexpected bill in the mail or something to that effect. But it's really the chronic stress that we're talking about. People that, for example, take care of other people who have dementia or Alzheimer's disease are always on guard 24 hours a day. That type of stress can really wreak havoc to the brain, and there's different studies out there that show that caregivers of people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia have much greater problems with mental health and early death, in fact, due to the related stress. So we want to acknowledge that stress is out there, but we want to be able to work through it. And that might take help with counseling and other mental health activities that we're seeing explode right now as far as the need of people requiring counseling and other mental health treatment because of all the stress that, as a society, we're under.
Jeff, is there one gender that is more predisposed to stress or anxiety than the other?
I don't know if that's necessarily true. However, I can tell you as far as Alzheimer's disease, the more the caregivers are women, but the flip side of that is more women actually have Alzheimer's disease, and the primary factor to that is they generally live longer. And as I said at the get-go, the major risk factor for women, or excuse me, for all people, is age. As we age, there's a greater risk. So by definition, women do live longer, and so they have a higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease. But it takes on everyone as far as Alzheimer's disease and stress, and we have to think about it right now, today, what we can do to lower our stress levels and lower our risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow, okay. Jeff Bost is our guest. Jeff has been with us in the past. He's been on this radio station many times, neurosurgical physician assistant. We're talking about managing stress and new clinical studies coming out about Alzheimer's, and we will pick that up in the next portion of the program. But Jeff is also co-host of a program on this radio station called Living Well with Dr. Maroon. And these are some of the topics that you discussed on Living Well?
Absolutely. Please join us on Saturday mornings. It's a great time. You don't even have to get out of bed because it's Saturday, so enjoy it.
All right. There it is, part of the relaxation that you're talking about.
Right.
We'll continue our conversation with Jeff Bost. We're talking about Alzheimer's, ways to try and help prevent it, and also these promising clinical studies that we're hearing about all the time. It seems as though a week doesn't go by where you don't read something about Alzheimer's and some of the studies that are being done. We'll continue the conversation. Jeff Bost is our guest. You're listening to the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network.
It's been stated before that working at St. Barnabas is compassionate work with excellent career opportunities. In addition, we've heard when you enjoy what you're doing every day, it's not work. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen in to what motivates their employees.
Hello, my name is Emily Tahansky, and I love to be able to help others and knowing that I make a difference in a person's life.
Find out about the exceptional career opportunities St. Barnabas has to offer by visiting stbarnabashealthsystem.com/careers for more information, or by calling 724-444-JOBS. That's 724-444-5627. Find out why St. Barnabas is apart from the ordinary.
This is the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. I'm Mike Romigh. We're talking with neurosurgical physician assistant Jeff Bost. And Jeff, it seems as though on a daily basis we hear or read about clinical studies aimed at providing the cure, or at least a reduction in the escalation of memory loss brought on by Alzheimer's. You and Dr. Maroon have established some guidelines that are beneficial for all in the slowing down the effects of Alzheimer's. Can you talk about some of those common sources and how they may reduce brain plaque?
Well, what we're talking about is brain health, and we alluded to some of that in the first half of the show, and the fact that, the things that we put in our mouth and the exercise we do can have tremendous benefits, not only for our brain, but for our heart and other organs. We have worked primarily over the years with omega-3 fatty acids, the oil that comes from seafood and fish, and also from the plant flax and some other plants. But interestingly, we've discovered early on that about 60% of our brain cells, the neurons, the outer coating or their membrane, is made out of omega-3 fatty acids. So if you're deplete in omega-3, your brain is really not functioning as well as it should be. And we know that with surveys of people over the years, that only maybe less than 5% of the people consume enough omega-3 fatty acids. So it's really an epidemic as far as a shortage of omega-3 fatty acids in people's diet. And we strongly recommend it for that reason. It's used to build brain cells or neurons, and if you don't have enough, your brain's not getting enough. And there's a good reason why, for example, that babies and mothers that are having babies are given omega-3 fatty acids to build the brain cells of their unborn child. So it's an important factor diet-wise. We know that consuming things like antioxidants found in blueberries and other fruits and vegetables have a benefit for our brain. They're antioxidants. They reduce brain inflammation. We've talked in the past about a molecule called resveratrol, which is found in red wine and red grapes, that can have a benefit. Certainly it's not the alcohol, but a moderate or a modest amount of red wine can have some benefit. But there's lots of different foods that have antioxidants in them versus the inflammatory diet, which a lot of us do consume. High fatty, high salt type diet that is inflammatory, meaning it sets up an inflammatory cycle in our body, and that can affect the blood vessels, our brain, our heart. All organs are affected by it. So a dietary change can have a huge difference in our life and our brain health.
Should we be eating more of a Mediterranean diet than the Western diet that we've all been raised on?
Well, we actually did a show on our program, Living Well, about a mixture of a diet that used the Mediterranean diet as well as another diet, and it was called the MIND diet. And it actually did what you said. It had a high amount of plant-based foods that were high in antioxidants, and they did show that this did reduce the incidence of conditions like Alzheimer's and memory decline in people. So, and this was I think it was over a 10-year period. And interestingly, they asked at the end of the study, these were older folks, but at the end of the study, they were able to do autopsies on the study participants, and they noticed that they had significantly reduced brain plaque as well, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease. So this was one of the biggest studies to prove that what you eat is how you'll be as far as your brain health. And
how do we know if the foods that we're consuming have antioxidants, are antioxidant type foods? Because it's probably not on the labels.
That's a great question, Mike, because labels nowadays have, 20, 30 ingredients that are, to pick through what's healthy and what's not. ultra-processed foods generally are not healthy in the sense that, candies, cookies, the things that we eat, we see on the store aisles, just full of them, have so many different ingredients. The idea is to eat foods that are natural. When you pick up a grapefruit or an orange, that's a grapefruit, that's an orange, or a carrot. That is a single food item, and we know what it is, and those are well documented as far as the antioxidants, other minerals, and vegetables, and vitamins that are contained in them. So it's difficult to walk down the store aisle and know what's healthy, and that's really the industry of food is really doing us a disservice by putting these multi-ingredient labels out there that we really can't tell what's healthy or not.
Mm-hmm. And we live in a region where our growing season only lasts for so long. We're coming into that planting season now where we'll be able to grow our own fruits and vegetables. So the people in the warmer climates tend to have a little bit of a head start over us here in the Northeast.
I would strongly agree with that. If you have a garden, organic garden, avoid pesticides and herbicides, I think it's a great service to yourself and your family. Not only cost savings, but the food tastes better, obviously, and it'll generally be healthy for you.
Mm-hmm. What age group seems to benefit most from following this type of diet regime?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
What age group benefits most?
It's really any age group. Youngsters, as we know, their brain is developing, their organs are developing. They need all the minerals and vitamins they can get. As we get into middle age and older, we have stressors, and we can't always eat right, which a good, healthy diet, at least one meal a day, can be very helpful. And when we get older, that's really essential to try to put away all those inflammatory foods, the chips, and the sodas and the other things that the high sugar contents, the desserts that we see out there, they look great and they taste great, but they certainly have, if you eat them on a daily basis or more than that, can have an accumulative negative effect on our health.
Jeff, as we know, it takes sometimes years for the FDA to approve specific drugs. Tell us a brief history about these, and I can't pronounce the ones that we have listed here. But
well, I'll help you, Mike, on that.
Thank you. Okay, good.
I was prepared for your question today, and I can tell you that the drug industry certainly has been working hard over the decades on Alzheimer's disease and other degenerative diseases of the brain. And yet, really, we can't say that there's been any huge success from the pharmaceutical industry. There are 2 new drugs that have come out recently, and I'll pronounce the names that they are called now, which is Adyahem, which is a new drug that's a monoclonal antibody, which means it's developed specifically to attack a certain protein, and what it attacks and destroys through activating our immune system is the plaque that's associated with Alzheimer's disease. And there's another sister drug from the same company called Leqembi, which is essentially the same medication. They're both injectables that have worked also as a monoclonal antibody to decrease the amount of plaque. Now, the first drug that I discussed was discovered and talked about 2 years ago now, and unfortunately, it did not have significant clinical benefits, meaning it did show on MRIs and specialized tests that it was able to lower the plaque burden in the brain, but it didn't show significant cognitive improvement. So the brain looked better, but the person didn't necessarily look better. Whereas the second drug, Leqembi, was given to patients earlier in their condition, meaning they weren't late-stage Alzheimer's disease. They had what we call mild to moderate memory problems. And in that group, it also showed that the plaque had diminished, but it also, unlike the first drug, showed that it showed clinical benefits in their memory and other cognitive function. So this drug is now going to be approved by the FDA as a drug that's going to be available to the public. As I said, it is an infusion. It is given twice a month. There are some downsides, of course. It's very expensive. It's not paid for by insurance. As I said, it will be an infusion, which will need to be done at least twice a month, at least currently. And we haven't followed it for a long time, meaning there's only more recent studies about this. It's been what's called fast-tracked, meaning it showed some benefit, maybe not all the benefit that it'll eventually show. But I hate to say it's a start because they've been starting on these drugs now for decades, but perhaps it's a new method using the monoclonal antibodies to try to lessen the load of the plaque and then perhaps eventually cause brain improvement.
Well, we hear these reports coming out, and I certainly appreciate you pronouncing those drugs for me, because I would have said aducanumab. I was way off.
Those were the names before they shortened them for the rest of it.
But we hear about these things all the time, and many of us watch movies, especially if you have a parent or a loved one who has Alzheimer's, and you think that there's this miracle cure out there for them, and that our family is going to wake up. Awaken was one of those movies. You wake up and all of a sudden, you're cognizant of your surroundings and everything. It just doesn't work that way, does it?
Well, here's what I hope, Mike. I think that we have some control, and the idea is about making choices and having some control, and we do have some control. It's a problem, though, if we wait till the very end. And I think the control and the word to go out is to tell people, start in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and try to delay or prevent these chronic conditions of the brain like Alzheimer's disease and dementia earlier, rather than waiting for that pill to be developed when you already have the condition. And, the stopping the smoking, the changing of the diet, the exercise, and all those other factors that you can do through a lifestyle change are probably at this point significantly more important than waiting for a drug once you have the condition.
In our final minutes, I recently read an article about an experimental drug that Eli Lilly is researching that clears up amyloid plaque. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that it's along the same line as what we've talked about, these two medications. They're hoping that it can reduce the plaque burden. As the plaque burden does get greater in the brain of someone with Alzheimer's disease, we do know that causes greater deterioration in the cognitive function or the thinking function. So there is a correlation to that. But again, what is enough and what's too little? No one really knows that. They've done autopsies on brains which show significant plaque in some people who have had no problems with their memory or cognitive function, and yet they've found people that have had little plaque or moderate plaque, and yet they have profound dysfunction, and their memory is shot. So the actual correlation between the actual plaque burden and the function of a person is difficult to say. So it might be the right track. We just don't know at this point.
Very good. Jeff Bost, our guest and also co-host of Living Well here on the radio stations. Thanks for the dedication that you show in the well-being of the residents and patients at St. Barnabas. I know we'll be talking again, Jeff. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Great to be here, Mike.
And thank you for listening and watching the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. I'm Mike Romigh. Be safe and live healthy.
When you think about retirement, what images come to mind? Why not let yourself imagine enjoying an exceptional retirement lifestyle at the Village at St. Barnabas in Gibsonia? Attainable luxury can become yours because the Village has no large upfront fees and it's based on a simple annual no-risk contract. The only decision to make is when to move in. Call 724-443-0700 or click stbarnabashealthsystem.com.
Thank you for listening to the Best of Beaver County. St. Barnabas is pleased to have provided content and sponsorship for the program. Tune in this Sunday at 11:30 for an encore presentation of today's program on Beaver County Radio. And next Thursday at 11 for another edition of the Best of Beaver County on WBVP, WMBA, and 99.3 FM.